Hey everybody, it's Sarah, the wine-loving bookworm, back with another wine and book review for you tonight. We just got finished watching the end of the Seattle and Cowboys football game. It was really exciting. Seattle won. If you can see my jersey, but I've got a 49 on there. Seattle Seahawks 49, who happens to be Shaquem Griffin, who went to UCF, and I think you probably already know that, but I went to UCF, huge UCF football fan. The guy has an extraordinarily inspiring story. Really hard worker, really great football player. So if you've never heard of him, look him up, Shaquem Griffin, and just read about him because you will just be amazed by where he came from to get to the point where he's now a professional football player. Anyway, I digress. Really big football fan, so I'm probably going to talk about that a little bit. Let's talk about wine, another one of my favorites. Okay, tonight I'm going to try Erath, I don't know, E-R-A-T-H, not sure how to pronounce that. It's an Oregon Pinot Noir. We're also huge fans of Oregon, the state itself. So I like to try Oregon wines. I mean, I just like Oregon. And also, it's twist off, which I love a good twist off wine. I mean, isn't that so much easier than the cork? Like, I'm so glad that is not, how it used to be like, oh, twist off. You can't have twist off wine. That's the, low class or whatever. And now things are twist off. I love it. So let's give it a shot. Cheers. Ooh, that's really good. I think I told you guys before that I'm a huge fan of French red wines because they're real soft, they're not strong, real light, I guess I should say. This tastes like a French wine. Oh yeah, that's really good. If you like Pinot Noirs, red, kind of light tasting red wines, that's a good one. Erath. I do know that one's like a little bit more pricey. I mean, for me, if anything's over $15 a bottle of wine, I'm like, I don't know about that. And I think Erath's like $17.99 or something like that. So it's a little bit more than some other brands, but that's really good. So I think that's worth it. Okay, so moving on. I told y'all I was going to post the book I chose on Wednesday, and I actually didn't do it till yesterday, I think, yesterday or Friday. So sorry about that. This week has been crazy. Time really got away from me. But I did read the book, and I read Beneath a Ruthless Sun by Gilbert King. I was really excited to read this book, so I think I don't know if you can see up there, but he was the man who wrote Devil in the Grove, which is another book I read like a couple years back, and he actually won the Pulitzer Prize for that book. He is an excellent writer. He is this is nonfiction, and the books he writes are nonfiction. They're real, true stories. He is a kind of a civil rights, social justice author, and he's written for the New York Times and the Washington Post. He's also a photographer, so some of his stuff has been featured in big-time magazines like Vogue and things like that I read. But this is definitely where he shines in these books. I mean, he's amazing. These books are just so amazing. Again, I said nonfiction. It was about 375 pages, so decent size, not overwhelming, but decent size. So I read Devil in the Grove. I also saw that he wrote something called The Execution of Willie Francis, Race, Murder, and the Search for Justice in the American South. That kind of sums up all his books that he writes, if you want to know what they're about. That's kind of what it's about. Especially in the past, like the 50s and 60s and things like that. That's when Devil in the Grove and Beneath the Ruthless Sun took place. Injustice to African American communities, especially in Florida. Both Devil in the Grove and Beneath the Ruthless Sun took place in Florida, specifically Lake County, which is where I live. And I'm not sure about the other one, but so south, Florida is, especially this area. I grew up in South Florida. That's really not the South. Like they say, the farther south you go in Florida, you're not in the South anymore. Central and northern Florida is very southern in the way they just are. So it is the South, even though it's Florida. So Devil in the Grove took place in Groveland, and Beneath the Ruthless Sun, this book, took place in Oklahoma, which I'm not entirely sure where that is. That's like somewhere out there. There's different areas of Lake County. I live in Mount Dora, which is more populated, and those places out there are more very rural kind of areas, especially back then. I'm sure these took place in like 1950s. So back then, extremely rural, backwards kind of living. there are pluses and minuses to living in Lake County. Like I said, I grew up in South Florida. I grew up in Miami. I grew up in the Keys for a little bit, Naples. These are bigger cities, more cosmopolitan. Then I lived in Orlando when I went to school for a long time. Gosh, I don't know, 12, 13 years, maybe more than that. And I had never lived in a town like this. And there are pluses and minuses to that. It's, relatively safe. There's no traffic, I like that. There's just a very more laid back vibe than some of the other towns have. I do like Orlando. Orlando's one of my favorite cities to live in. But there's a totally different vibe here. Everybody isn't go, go, go. It's kind of laid back. So that's a good thing. But on the downside, there's still a lot of, I don't want to offend anybody, but I see racism here. I see more segregation between races, there's not a lot of mixing, which was really weird for me when I got here because I was used to being in a big college and big college town and living in Orlando. It was kind of a little bit jarring to see that when I got here. So, just to kind of give you a flavor of what Lake County is, it's a very country kind of southern area. One of the big minuses to living in Lake County if you were black in the 50s and 60s, and I'm not sure how long he was around, but was Sheriff Willis McCall. He is a notorious Lake County sheriff. Very racist, not afraid to hide his racism. I mean, he did interviews because of all the notoriety that came out of these cases that I'll get to in a minute. He flat out, just said he didn't like black people. It was a little bit crazy, but this is who he was. Said he wore a big Stetson hat, went into the courtroom. One lawyer commented, everybody has to take off their hats when they come to the courtroom. Nobody asked him to take off his hat. He was very powerful sheriff, and was around for a while, I think. I don't know his exact tenure, but for both of these books at least. So he was a sheriff around here for a long time. He tended to just, if there was a case, for whatever reason, he didn't want the real person to take the fall, he would really kind of go seek out a black man or a group of black men and then just frame them. I mean, there was a whole issue with him. One of the things he liked to do was steal their shoes and make shoe prints around the crime scene, and then have people come in and make casts of them and then say, oh, you see, it was them. And when he just blatantly, he did that. It wasn't real evidence. He was blatantly falsifying evidence. It was just, but he could do whatever he wanted. Judges were scared of him. The police, obviously, everybody he was over was scared of him. Mayors, the DA, the prosecutors, all this stuff. They just kind of fell in line with whatever he wanted to do. He wielded this immense power, and he was a very bad, very corrupt man. So that just created a hotbed, that Gilbert King has very artfully described and told a tale about. It needs to be told, because this guy's a bad guy. So anyway, in the Lake County in the 50s and 60s, very active Ku Klux Klan, burning crosses and all that stuff in people's yards. They had a group called the Quarterback Club, which was a little classier in the Ku Klux Klan. They didn't go around with white sheets on their head, but they were all the prominent people in town. The sheriff was a member, the the mayor, all the big businessmen in town. So it was kind of a good old boys kind of group, and they just kind of met, and they went to football games with together, and they went out drinking or whatever they did. So kind of that boys only white men club that you hear about. So this book in particular tells the tale of a woman named Blanche Knowles. She was married to Joe Knowles, I guess they call him in the book, who was a very prominent citrus businessman. I don't think he was a farmer, but he was very prominent in the citrus business in Florida at the time, which was a booming business in Florida. She was home alone with her kids, and Joe was off apparently with his mistress, because that's what he did, and so he wasn't home. And a guy broke into her house and raped her. And I mean, that's pretty much, that's what happened. There was no doubt that that's what happened. In her interview about it, she said he was this is my words, husky Negro that raped her. So basically, they heard this from this woman, went over to where the African Americans lived, and just basically rounded up every male black guy in the neighborhood and took them in for questioning. I mean, there was no logic to it. There was no anything. They just took them all, you know. So this kind of tells you a little bit more about how it was back then. So they brought them down to the jail, interviewed them. They kept this one kid for like days, you know, wouldn't let his parents come talk to him. They wouldn't let them have counsel. I mean, all of these just blatant violation of rights. Finally released him, but they wouldn't even tell him where the parents where the kid was, you know, and they took him to Tampa and all this craziness. But they released him, and he had to stay over Christmas. And it was kind of a surprise. They just kind of all of a sudden did it, and they really thought they were going to, you know, pin this crime on this one kid. And then they just all of a sudden released him. And it was inexplicably, at the time, until they kind of explain it later, that the sheriff and his deputies started targeting Jesse Daniels, who was a white, I think about 18 years old, kid that lived in Oklahoma. And for the crime, after the lady said the guy was black, they just suddenly go after this guy. And he is slow to some degree, low IQ. There was kind of conflicting stories about where his intelligence was. Later on it became that maybe he wasn't so, slow. But that was kind of what everybody knew him. He rode his bike around and just knew him as a little bit slow. The police just turned on him and said it was him that did it. They actually coerced a confession out of him, which he signed, and he said he did it, and he put all these details in there. It came out later that they were possibly holding a gun to his head while they did it. And one of the reasons, this is a real story, so everything isn't nailed down. But one of the reasons they said that they probably did that was because it would have been worse for Blanche, as a prominent, member of Lake County, to have been raped by a black man than it would be a white man. I mean, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but that was just the thing. And so that's why they kind of flipped the script and went after, they were going after who she said, and they're like, oh, wait. And then, I think the family talked to the sheriff, was like, you can't arrest a black guy for this, because this is going to look really, really bad. It already looks bad, but this is going to look worse. So you need to find a white guy. This is how this worked. Like, crazy, right? And her husband was a member of that quarterback club with all these other guys. So, this is how it all comes together. So anyway, they, in his confession, he said that she asked him who he was, and he said Jesse Daniels. She knew who he was, she knew who Jesse Daniels was. So even if it was dark and she couldn't really see, but if he said his name, why would she say it was a black guy? There was a lot of inconsistencies in the confession, but they just, were like, oh, don't see those, blind to those. He just confessed, and that's it. They committed him to a mental hospital. A notoriously horrible hospital up in North Florida. I think it was in Chattahoochee or something. And they said, I guess, I'm not really sure why they did that instead of, just going ahead and convicting him, maybe because they felt bad for him because they thought he was, a little slow. But they went ahead and committed him. And the only evidence of his insanity was the fact that he kept denying that he was guilty of the crime. And they submitted, to the doctors his confession, and he's denying, so he's delusional. Like, no, it was crazy. But he was in there for just years and years and years and years and years. It was like indefinite term. And the doctors in the hospital were just going along with the stuff the sheriff wanted him to go along with. I mean, absolute craziness going on here, in 50s and 60s. There was a reporter. She was also in Devil in the Grove, Mabel Norris Reese. She was a thorn in that sheriff's side because she would write stuff about him. She would write the truth. She would tell the truth, and he hated that. So he really did not care for that reporter. And she actually had a cross burned in her yard. She had something blown up. I don't know, like they had some homemade bomb or something that went off in her yard and, blew her porch up or something like that. So she was definitely targeted by, the powers that be in Lake County at the time. But she never stopped fighting for Jesse. Jesse's mom, Pearl, wasn't even allowed to see him. It was a horrible situation. She'd write him and send him stuff. She had no money. They were very poor. So Mabel really, really fought with her. Got attorneys to donate their time. Kept putting stuff in the paper so people wouldn't forget about it. Kept trying to get things written in the New York Times and the Washington Post. So it would have more of a national feel. She wasn't very successful at a lot of that stuff, but she was successful in getting some attorneys interested in it who really did fight for Jesse. Later on in the book, the Lake County Sheriff's Office apprehended a black guy for a rape, which he did admit to at the time. But, you know, in kind of a plot twist, the guy says, Jesse Daniel didn't rape Blanche Knowles, and I know who raped her. And so that kind of created a tizzy. At the time, rape was a capital crime, you know, punishable by the death penalty. And if you were black and you raped a white woman, you know you were going to the chair. And it moved really fast. I know today it takes forever to, you know, get the death penalty administered, but it was pretty fast with him. Once his appeal was done, it was 2 weeks. So his whole thing didn't go anywhere. 1, because they were trying to bury it. 2, because he was getting electrocuted, you know, he didn't have a lot of time to tell the story. 3, he was pretty inconsistent in his stories. I think he did know. I think he was aware that it wasn't Jesse and that it was someone else, but it was just unclear who he was talking about. His story would kind of change from day to day, so it didn't go anywhere. So I'm not going to give away all the ending to the story or what happens, but some of the questions are: would the sheriff ever get in trouble for this? Will Jesse ever get out of the mental hospital? Is he just going to spend his life there? There's actually a rumor that Blanche's husband paid someone to kill her that night, and it ended up becoming a rape, which is weird. But that was another story out there. There was a story out there that Blanche just loved to get really drunk and then hook up with guys, and maybe there was a guy she shouldn't have or whatever. She made up this story. And then will Blanche's rape ever be solved? I mean, these are all questions the book asks. Interwoven in the story were smaller stories about the way African Americans were treated in Lake County. There was a black woman who was raped by 4 boys, white, I should say, boys and men. They kind of spanned the spectrum, 4 of them. And the treatment of her was abhorrent. You know, just saying well, you must have had some pleasure from it, and what were you wearing, and how much were you drinking, you know, and you know, and they got off. They didn't get the death penalty, even though she was badly beaten. She was kidnapped. She was strung up in the back of their car, you know, raped 7 times. They didn't get the death penalty, you know, because the jury came back with a guilty verdict with mercy, it's called, and that means they don't want them to get the death penalty. So that was horrible. And then there was a bunch of stories about black guys that would be taken to the jail and they would be beaten and die a lot of the time. One guy, his skull was cracked open, his whole thing, and the sheriff told the coroner, "Oh, he just collapsed. I don't know what happened. He just collapsed." And the coroner ruled that it wasn't suspicious death. I mean, clearly he was beaten to death. It's mind-blowing, this stuff. So anyway, I love the book. He's a great writer, meticulous detail, great research, but he doesn't get so bogged down in it that it gets boring, you know. It's very interesting, it flows, it moves. So just a great, both of them, Devil in the Grove and Beneath the Ruthless Sun. Read them both because they are just excellent, and I'm going to look up that Willie Francis one too, and maybe I'll read that one and review it on the blog. It is a bit frustrating because it's a real story. Things don't get tied neatly in a bow, you know, you don't know exactly what happened or who did what or what, you know, because it's just the way it is being nonfiction. It's not like a fiction book where they, you know, go, he did it and he goes to jail and whatever, you know. It's different that way. So anyway, that's my review of Beneath the Ruthless Sun. Next week, I'm going to read the Columbine book. I'm going to try to read this one. It looks a little scary, right? It looks big and small words, but I'm going to try to read that one. And then the week after, I'm looking at Eleanor Oliphant is Completely Fine. That's my book club book for October. So I'm going to do that one the week after. The other thing I wanted to show you guys, I don't know if you've ever heard of this shop, but we went to Jacksonville today to visit my stepdaughter up in college, and she took me to a shop called, Charles and Second, I think they call it, or Second and Charles, one of those two. And, sorry, very back. BRB. Got all these books, all those books. It was $10. I mean, they're so cheap. Some of them are $1. You know, it's kind of like a big used bookstore, but it's a chain too. So I don't know. I've never been in one before. They had new stuff. They had music. They had DVDs. They had games, things like that. So they had a mixture of things. But of course, you know, I go straight to the books. So I got all those books for real cheap. So hopefully I'll be able to read those and review those for you too coming up. So anyway, that's my book review for tonight. Go out and get Beneath the Ruthless Sun. I mean, amazing. If you're at all interested in this, if you live in Lake County, it's fascinating and amazing to me, the stuff that went on. And you can get yourself some Erath, whatever, wine, Pinot Noir, because it is delicious. Anyway, that's all for me. Until next week, cheers.